tonight we're going to be talking with our former local police chiefs. They're going to answer some questions around some questions that students asked actually, and we're going to have some answers. And then afterwards, there are other police officers from all four districts, right? All four districts are here. And then we'll go out and you can mingle and continue to ask questions and get to know the officers so that, you know, we can build better relationships in the community. So this has sort of come out of how do we engage with police officers in our local community, and then things that we can go back to you can go back to your local community when you leave here and also try to engage with folks there. So this is the second program that we've actually had dealing with relationships with police officers. And back in October, when we had Samir Rice and Gwen Carr here, the mothers of Tamir Rice and Eric Gardner, I felt that their message at the end of the night was very strong and powerful in that we need to engage with our police officers and get to know them and understand what's going on. So this program kind of was born out of that, as well as us just needing to engage more and get to know our police officers. So on our panel tonight is, let me see, I'm going to do it in the order she has it. So Chief Tyler Dolly, who is the chief of Patton Township. Chris Albright is the chief of Ferguson Township Police. Tom, how do you say your last name? Sowerby. He was the deputy chief of the Penn State Police Department here at University Park. And John Gardner, who is the chief of the State College Police Department. So, we have my timekeeper, she's given us a very specific schedule to stick to. So we're going to stick to it. Because normally, normally a PRC event that starts at 6 really doesn't start at 6:10. So we can give everybody, we know how latecomers are. We know we gotta get people here. So she's scared of me. So I'm gonna be on time. No, I'm just kidding. Part of it is we really want to have that engagement with you as the audience, with the folks. So that's the real reason that we're going to stick to the schedule. So our first subject area is knowing rights when engaging with police was the subject area that we put out for students to give us questions that they wanted to have answered. So the first question is from the students is, if I exercise my right to remain silent, does that still give an officer the right to search me? So anyone can go.
All right, I'll start. So if you decide to remain silent, that doesn't mean that we're going to search you. That doesn't give us the right to search you just because you remain silent. There's a couple triggers. In the state of Pennsylvania, officers can conduct a pat-down for protection. So pat-downs are permissible. You've heard of like a Terry frisk. And those are permissible when the officer has reasonable suspicion that the individual has a weapon. That reasonable suspicion also is founded on specific articulable facts that are known to the officer, and not just that they think that something is up, that they believe the person does have reasonable suspicion has a weapon with them. The other one would be if you were going to be arrested. As a result of that arrest, you will be searched, and including inside your pockets and everything that you have on you. So there would be a very all-inclusive search if you are under arrest for any kind of offense.
Anyone on that covered it for everyone? So there's no difference between, that's Pennsylvania law. Good question. Okay. Number 2. Can I ask why I am getting a ticket or being stopped without being charged with resisting arrest?
Absolutely. I mean, it's your right to know why you're being stopped at any time. There's a time and a place for everything, though, depending on the circumstances and the situation. yes, you have a right to know that, and it should be fully explained to you.
And then also to add a little bit to that too as well, resisting arrest requires some type of resistance, not just verbal. You have to be fighting or not, cooperating with the officers. They're trying to handcuff you at some level. So just asking a question does not rise to the level of resisting arrest.
So I'm going to assume that this question comes from students seeing things on Facebook, right? Seeing officers' engagement with black men who may have asked a question, and then the next thing that they see is the officer saying, "Don't resist," and then they're touching or grabbing the person. What they see in the video is the person only asking questions. So I think for them, how do we alleviate that, tension? I think that's there. How would you suggest, or to the students, how
Well,
we handle that?
again, in the example here about getting a ticket, so are we talking about a parking ticket, a stop sign violation, or are we talking about a disorderly conduct? So when you're urinating in public and there's more interaction, it all depends on the circumstances here. We say ticket, so again, full-blown arrest, where maybe the officer's coming upon a fight and they're trying to separate the parties, totally different scenario than a traffic stop.
And also, I think what's changed a lot too is it's a training issue. It used to be, back in the day when I went to the academy and all that, it was about get identification first before you answer any questions and all that. Well, a lot of times, you're stopped by the police. That could be a very unnerving thing, and you don't know what's going to happen. So I think a lot of times, especially in a traffic type situations, let the person know why you're stopping. That automatically puts 95% of the public at ease about that. So letting them know why they're being stopped. And that's changing now too, is how we train officers to, let them know. It's no big secret. We're stopping you for this. This is what I observed. Okay, and then now, as a result, so we can get this resolved, I need to see their license, registration, insurance card if it's a traffic stop.
And I was just going to add too, most officers have been trained in what's called verbal judo, and they actually give them a dialogue that they practice and give each time they go up to the car, and that does include, you're being stopped for speeding, whatever the case may be. So the question of why am I being stopped or why am I getting a ticket, hopefully should already be have been explained right from the get-go.
So staying with the theme there, so what's the difference between detainment and arrest?
I'll jump in on that. Think about it in terms of, there are like three major type of engagements you can have with the public as a police officer. There's a mere encounter, there's an investigatory detention, where I'm trying to investigate something, and then leads on up to arrest, which is the most. So a mere encounter is that I walk up to you on the street, I see you, and I start asking you questions. In that situation, Miranda or anything of that nature does not kick in. It's basically, it may be a place you're at, it could be a high crime area. It could just be I bump into you somewhere and I start talking to you, and I might say, hey, how are you doing? So no Fourth Amendment rights or any constitutional rights kick in. It's just I run into you. It's not a planned event. I'm not detaining you in any way. And the test of that is, am I free to walk away from this? So that might be a question you might want to ask a police officer. If he's talking to you on the street, or she's talking to you on the street, and you're starting to feel like maybe I'm not free to go, that would be a question you'd want to ask. Am I free to go? Am I being detained? Okay, so that's just a mere encounter. We have those every day. We bump into each other. And then police officers it's their job, it's their nature. Then they see something that doesn't appear right, then they're going to investigate a little further, which kicks into then an investigatory stop, to where I might have a reasonable suspicion, which is less than probable cause you need for arrest, but it's a reasonable suspicion that criminal activity or something might be afoot here, and I have to investigate a little further. And that might be a situation where it's a high crime area. It could be a location. It could be circumstances. you see hand-to-hand transactions and money maybe changing hands or whatever. So it's incumbent on a police officer to investigate that. In this particular case where it's an investigative detention, you're not really free to walk away, and your constitutional rights would come into play here to a degree, where you would have Fourth Amendment protection against unlawful search and seizure. I have to have a reasonable suspicion to make that stop. I can't just go out there and say, I'm going to stop every third person, or I'm going to stop everybody, and just go on a fishing expedition. I have to have a reasonable suspicion. And then thirdly, and then the test for that is that I'm not free to go. So what constitutes that? Well, I may ask you for an ID, and if I have your ID, you're not going to be feeling free to go walking away right there. So that's a test right there. So I could then, based on that reasonable suspicion, or that investigatory stop I made for you, I could develop what is now called probable cause, where I think there has been a crime committed here, or and that you're probably the individual or individuals that may have done this. So that's probable cause, which now, which is a higher standard than reasonable suspicion. And basically, all probable cause is that here's a crime that's been committed, and with all likelihood, you're probably the individual who did this. Okay, doesn't mean you're going to get convicted of it, but it was enough to give that officer the ability under the law to make an arrest. And then what often gets kicked around, and I know it's your next question, I don't want to steal this, but it's the question of Miranda.
Keep going.
Okay.
Next question is, when are my Miranda rights told to me?
Okay. Miranda, that's probably one of the most misunderstood things of all. Just because somebody comes up to you and starts asking you questions, Miranda doesn't work. Miranda is all about custody, okay? So if you're in police custody, and it could be that I've got you and I'm not going to let you leave because I might detain you on scene while I may have another officer looking, for some other evidence or what have you, and there's detention. So it's about custody. So if you're not free to leave, at least in my particular case, I would not ask you any pertinent questions when an individual doesn't feel that they're free to leave. Now that's a state of mind too to the individuals there. Let's take it one step further. I take you back on station. I'm interviewing you right now. I ask you to come in for an interview, and I have you in an interview room, and I say, you're not being held, you're not going to be charged, and you're not under arrest, and you're free to leave at any time. But let's say I put you in an interview room and a table, and you're back in a corner, and I'm sitting in front of the door. Do you feel like you're going to be able to leave? So it's much more about me just communicating that you're free to leave, but it's also what type of an environment am I setting up. So those are things that, as a police officer, we all have to be cognizant of when we're doing things like that. So, but once the focus is centered, once we decide that you're the person that we're focused on, and and I'm not, in my mind, I'm not going to let you leave that night because I'm pretty certain you're the individual that committed the crime, and I'm focused on you. I'm going to give you your Miranda rights, obviously, because you aren't going to be free to leave. And the reason to do that, give you those Miranda rights, is so that anything that I learned during that investigation isn't going to get thrown out later on, because I didn't give you the right to know that you had the right to counsel and have them present, the right to remain silent and what have you, so that you wouldn't make statements against your own best interest. And somebody else can.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, custody and interrogation go hand in hand with this. So again, if the police want to use a statement from a person and they are in custody, then they have to read the rights. Doesn't mean if an officer doesn't read you your rights, at face value, a crime has been committed, they have the evidence there, a person still can be prosecuted. But to the chief's point of, we interview people all the time, we bring them into our station, we offer amenities to them, we tell them they're free to go, they don't have to answer questions. So per se, verbatim Miranda is not written, but all the key points of it are covered for that reason. So a person knows they don't have to talk, they are free to leave.
And just one last point, I guess, on it is if, for whatever reason, you're not Mirandized, that's actually in the defendant's favor at that point. But come court time, when you're being interviewed, it's not the time to argue that or fight that. But at court, that's something your attorney can bring up. But you weren't Mirandized after you were in custody.
I know you can all hear the feedback, so I'm playing around trying to keep it out. Okay, excuse me. So it's not what I see on TV? So next subject is use of force. When is it appropriate to defend yourself against an officer who is potentially using excessive force to detain you?
I'll start it. Never. There's no reason to. You know, there's procedures for excessive use of force, misconduct to file complaints, and that's the proper way to do that. You know, you use force against an officer, another officer may be coming in, they have no idea what just transpired, so they're going to try to protect that officer. So all it's going to turn into a mess. So the appropriate way is to comply and get ready for your case to be heard administratively or criminally. And it happens. You know, officers do go across the line. And misconduct complaints are filed and they fully investigated. And if they're criminal, they'll be referred to the district attorney's office.
But that's what police officers
Can use reasonable force when detaining somebody or arresting them. So if you get somebody who thinks that they're not being, or there's too much force used against them, the officer can then step up their force, and you just end up going up to, as Chief Sowerby said, into a big mess.
Yeah. Again, lastly, I guess, you know, if you're being arrested for a retail theft, you're now tacking on resisting arrest. So, you know, it could be a summary that all of a sudden is becoming a much bigger problem just because, you know, you weren't compliant or didn't comply to the officer's request and were trying to defend yourself. So, be careful with that.
And if I could just add, every situation where an officer, and I think it's common across all agencies, uses force, there's a use of force form that has to be filled out with every incident report that we do, that basically states what type of force was used. And believe it or not, you know, an officer presence is the use of force. It's just an officer in uniform. But handcuffing, if they use OC spray, the spray, if they use a baton, you know, or a mechanical device, if they use a taser or whatever, that all has to be reported. And then internally, every use of force, at least in the State College Police Department, I think it's true in every department across the region, is they all get reviewed by an internal affairs board within the police department to make sure that that force and that use of force was in compliance with our policy, and if it wasn't, if it's out of line with policy, then there's serious ramifications for that officer, and there's corrective action taken. It could be something as simple as a training issue, depending on how severe it was, or less severe it was, or if it's really severe, it could be on up to termination of an officer if it's found that the force was excessive and abusive. So everything from force used in an arrest to vehicle pursuits to taser use to any type of impact weapon that's used by a police officer, that gets reviewed by an internal affairs board in the police department.
And that's something that's actually, are you guys accredited through PLEAC?
Yes.
Okay. That's through accreditation. We're all accredited agencies. I always have a problem with that word. That's one of the things that we're actually required to do is to review our use of force incidents to make sure they are in compliance.
Can an officer take my phone out of my hand if I am being arrested?
Well, again, it's so common nowadays for people to videotape. So first of all, you're permitted, it's legal to videotape police officers performing their duties. So maybe that's a spin-off of this question. So I guess it depends on what's going on. If you're being arrested, we will do an inventory of the person once they're put under arrest. All their belongings are turned over to us, and we have them in our custody. So Again, why the phone is being taken, I'm not sure, but sure. You can empty your pockets, your keys, your wallet will be inventoried and all that, so that's standard procedure. Now, if it's just taking the phone because they're being videotaped, no, that's inappropriate. Phones can have evidence on them, obviously, of other things, so it all depends on what type of situation we're talking about.
It also can kind of come back onto an officer safety issue. If somebody in custody has their phone and they text whomever or whatever about what's going on with them currently, so it becomes an officer safety issue for our officers to be sure that ourselves and also the person we have in custody is safe.
And that's what I was going to say. The other thing too is, I know it sounds strange, but there's actually been phones that actually that are made to look like a phone, but it's actually a gun. And so that's one of the other reasons why it could potentially be taken and just checked. But, as I said, it's a situational thing that on a traffic stop, no one should be taking a phone, but if you are being taken under arrest, that it would be seized.
I think you sort of answered the next question there. So I'm going to go to the last one on our page, which is, what is the line between police enforcement and police brutality?
Well, that's sort of, I was going to say, I think the last two questions kind of are related a little bit. When you talk about restrictions on use of force, for us, there's a lot of big cases, but you have Tennessee versus Garner, which talk about use of force on fleeing felons. You have Graham v. Connor, which talk about, not being judged in hindsight 2020. And then there's also Scott v. Harris, where it talks about, reasonably objective force. And we're also governed by the Constitution. We're governed by the Pennsylvania Crimes Code, Chapter 5, where it talks about what force we're allowed to use, and then also department policies. So realistically, when you talk about use of force has to be reasonable, and it has to be, it has to be reasonable to the resistance that I'm getting. So it's one of those things that, if somebody's in custody, I have them handcuffed, that I can't keep punching them, that's excessive. But if it takes somebody to get, if it takes an officer to, pepper spray or something to get somebody in handcuffs, that's not excessive. Depending on, as I said, when you take in some of those factors to court cases on that end.
And it's also like, too, somebody's handcuffed, and they're saying things, I don't have the right now to hit them, because they're not a threat to me if they're handcuffed. I can't use a taser against them, I can't be spraying them, So those are all those things that, again, it goes back to, first of all, that wouldn't be tolerated, and those things all get reviewed. And if it's not in a report, and we get a report from, say a student or a citizen would come in and say, hey, this happened to me, the first thing we do as chiefs is you're going to pull that report to see what happened in there. And if that's not in there, then I've got a real problem if that's not in the police report. So then,
The use of a baton to someone's head is deadly force. So again, if it starts out if someone was hit in the legs or to be taken under control, that's one thing. But those are the things that we look for when you use of force reports. And obviously that would be clearly a misconduct if it's not a deadly force situation.
And that's it too. Some of the things that are helping us now are, we have in-car cameras and body cameras. So when we get those complaints, we can actually go back and look at some of that video footage and see if we're dealing with appropriate behavior or not.
Got a lot of questions, not a lot of time. So let's jump around. Let's get to training. So aside from race-based training, what other trainings do officers receive related to other groups of people, specifically LGBTQ?
Over the years, we've had enhanced diversity trainings here at the university. There's state mandated implicit bias trainings that we've had. So there's a variety. Specifically on LGBT issues, I don't think there's one full program on that, but they're intermixed.
That's what I know. We also have training on investigating hate crimes And I can't remember if it was a year or two ago through the Domestic Violence Academy that there was a block on LGBTQ issues.
So you kind of, Tom answered the second question on that area too, so there's only one more there, so let's ask that one. Are officers trained in de-escalation techniques?
Yes, we are. And if you don't mind, I'll go a little out of order. Assistant Chief Wilson here is prepared to speak on that, if that's okay.
Fine with me.
Can you hear me from here?
You can go to that mic right there, I'll turn it on for you.
Can everyone hear me? Okay, I'm Assistant Chief Wilson. I'm with the State College Police Department. We've been doing de-escalation training for a number of years now. I know Chief Jolly just brought it up. He mentioned verbal judo training. That was something that was big in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that was, I know several of us were trained as instructors in that, and brought that back to the county, and we went through a lot of training. Basically everyone in the departments was trained with that. Also, aside from that, within the MOPEC curriculum, there's some de-escalation training, and human relations training, as well as the MOPEC curriculum also has continued training in regards to that. Police officers have to attend in-service training, much like teachers do, every year to keep up their certifications, and MOPEC's woven a lot of that in the last couple of years into the state training that we all have to get. And then lastly, we recognize this is something we needed to go through again, send all of our departments through again. So we're in the process of doing that with another system, which is called, or another program, which is Surviving Verbal Conflict, that we are in the process now. Our department's going through that training as well as we're bringing it to the center region. It's basically a rebranding of verbal judo, and it's just to get our new officers on board, because we've had a lot of new officers, also to give a lot of our veteran officers just a refresher in that kind of training.
Thank you. Let's go back up to, what are officers allowed to search without a warrant? And then why don't we do the second one too? So that one, and then what is the process for an officer to obtain a warrant? And I'll caveat the second one with, that question was on a couple of different student things, but it was because they were in a class and they heard that it was rather easy for officers to obtain warrants. Not necessarily, I guess, so their thought process was, if it's pretty easy, then why don't they get them more often?
I say, without a warrant, there's 4 instances that come up with consent. So if a person, we go to their house and they allow us to come in and search their belongings, their property, whatever the case may be, that's one way. Another way would be if we are somewhere legally investigating something and we see something in plain view, then we can seize that as well. Another one would be incident to arrest. We kind of talked about this a little bit. We don't need a warrant to search somebody's person or property that they have readily available to them, or if they're in a vehicle, the area that's in their close proximity, we can search it out without a warrant. And then any exigent circumstances. So for instance, if we go to a domestic dispute, a third party might have called in and said, my neighbors are fighting, and we get there and we look through a window and see a male assaulting a female, then we can make entry into the residence to stop that assault without a warrant. So this would be the flag. I can't think of any other.
And I think to put that into kind of like examples as a traffic stop, you stop a car for speeding, you walk up, you have your interaction with the driver, and during that you ask him if you can search the car. There's no real reason for it, you just ask him to search and you can refuse that. And then you take it to the next level where maybe I walk up to that car and I smell burnt marijuana or see some type of drugs on the center console or something. Then I can take that, I can search the car without a warrant. And when you talk about search incidents to arrest. Now I get the driver out to arrest him for DUI or something like that. Once again, that's where I'm searching the immediate area of the car and the person. And then the last one would be essentially as if we got a report of somebody with a gun in the car and we were searching the car specifically for that. Kind of puts it into a little bit of context.
See, they're good. They answered all the questions that were in that area. And I only asked them two, but they answered them all. So the next one was, can an officer search my vehicle without a warrant? He just answered that question. At a traffic stop even. What is probable cause to search me? He answered all those. So we're good. See, they're on time. I like this.
We also mentioned about the process though, of getting a warrant.
That too.
So we didn't get into that. But that, basically an officer,
Once they have probable cause.
Go ahead.
probable
Eric.
cause, okay. Once they have probable cause to apply for a search warrant, there was an application. They have to fill out an affidavit of probable cause, which is all of the elements of what they want to search, where they want to search, why they believe they have the reason to search there, and also their training, their background, and kind of everything that led them to this moment where they're making this decision. They want to make an entry or do whatever to this property. That goes typically before a magisterial district judge. They review the application, they review the probable cause document to make sure that they are on board and agree that the police have probable cause to search a property, and then they would issue a search warrant based upon their determination was contained in that search warrant based on them reading it.
Last area, complaint. So how do I go about filing a complaint against an officer?
Well, there's a variety of ways. There's misconduct complaints against an officer or service complaints, where an officer may be rude or unattentive to your needs when you report something to them. It can be done online. It can be done in person, over the phone. We'll take complaints anyway. We have a professional standards policy that we follow. There's an intake process for it. The general information is taken. It is assigned to the chief, and then the chief will assign it to an investigating supervisor to continue the follow-up. And again, it is exact as a police investigation, just working backwards from the person making the complaint and trying to gather evidence.
And that is to say, I think that's pretty much the same process for all of us.
We take anonymous complaints. The only problem with anonymous complaints sometimes is, quite frankly, sometimes that initial complaint doesn't have all the information that you need. So realistically, then you have no way to go back to that person and obtain additional information that would help you out. Yes, it can be done anonymously, but quite frankly, sometimes the ability to be able to contact somebody is a little bit more helpful for us to be able to go back and get more information.
And about complaints, our community is really attentive to complaints. We want to know what's going on. In some of the groups and organizations, CCU, the campus environment team, these issues are discussed regularly. So if it's not reported to somebody, if it's not the police authorities, to other groups or advisors and such, it may get to us. Obviously, we'd like to have it directly so we can take care of the situation ourselves. But reporting it to someone is a great way to start.
And we also want to know about the good things. It doesn't just have to be the bad things. Feel free to reach out and let us know if you have a really good experience with our agencies as well.
Definitely. So if I file a complaint, and I don't go to anonymously, will I get follow-up as to what the outcome of my complaint was?
First of all, what we do at State College Police Department, you would get a letter acknowledging that you filed a complaint, that if you called and I talked to you, you would get a follow-up letter that we got your complaint, it's going to be investigated. Then after it goes through the investigative process, or whatever the disposition is, you would get notification once again of what the end result was.
Okay. So, let's see. Covered all those? We're good? So at this point in time, we're gonna move into the second portion of the program, which is for people to mingle. So, we reserve the space out in front of the auditorium, that it's easier for people to mingle out there. There are some snacks out there, I hope. Monica, did she put the snacks out? So you can grab some snacks. I know for the students that are sitting in here, I'm pretty sure you have more questions than what I asked, and probably a little bit different questions. But there are officers here, I think, that are willing, they're here because they're willing to answer those questions, to engage with you, to have the conversation around some of the things that you want to talk about, I'm sure. I think I know almost all of the officers that are here. So I'm pretty sure that I can say with confidence that they're willing to have those conversations with you. So please don't run away and go, do something else. Take this time to engage with the police officers that are here and have that conversation with them, so that you can get to know them like I do, and they can get to know you and what you're doing and how your experiences have been here at Penn State, both as a student, in the community. Like I said, we have officers from all 4 of the districts here, and I know for those of you that live off campus, you probably live in Patton or Ferguson, so engage with them and understand what's going on. Okay? Thank you all for coming, and you can head outside and get some snacks and talk to some folks.